coming in. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We're welcoming some folks into the main room, but we'll get started in about a quick minute. So thank you all for coming on out. And just as a little bit of a tech note, if you go in the upper right-hand corner and you click the hide non-video participants, you'll get more of that classic online panel vibe thing of just seeing the speakers that we have. So great. And so with that, let me start with some intros. And if the other panelists don't mind doing managing the welcoming folks in as I read off some things, that'd be nice. Hey everybody, thank you all so much for tuning in. My name is Carter Lavin. I'm the co-founder here of the Transbay Coalition, and this is part 3 of our panel series of gendered perspectives of Bay Area transit. And this one's very exciting one. I'm very particularly excited about it. This one is about transit advocacy and activism. And so we are joined today with 3 great panelists and a wonderful moderator. We're going to share lots of wisdom for us on all sorts of things. And one of our first panelists is Haleema Bharoocha. She specializes in promoting equity and public safety within transportation using non-carceral approaches. Nationally recognized for her efforts to ensure safe passage for marginalized communities, Haleema brings valuable experience from organizations like the American Public Transportation Association, Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and Transform. Haleema authored Ride Fearlessly, a framework for reimagining transit safety, co-led Not One More Girl, a youth-driven initiative combating gender-based violence on BART, which influenced California's SB 1161, the transit safety bill, and now considered a national model. And she presented her work on criminalization of mobility at the Transportation Research Board. Thank you, Haleema, for joining us today. It's excited to have you here. And we also have Lian Chang out of San Francisco. Lian is currently a proponent of Prop L, Fund the Bus, a ballot measure to increase operational funds for Muni. There we go, props and everything. She has previously supported transit priority improvements on Geary Boulevard through a campaign called Faster Safer Geary, and pedestrian safety as part of Walk San Francisco. Lian has also has experience in architecture, data storytelling, and tech startups. There we go. And lives with her husband and 7-year-old child in San Francisco. Thank you so much, Lian, for being here with us. Then we also have Abibat Rahman-Davies, is Transform's transportation policy advocate. A native of Southern California, her realization of the importance of transportation came early as limited transportation choices showed her the impact transportation can have on economic mobility. Her commitment to economic justice and transportation took her to Washington, D.C., where she worked as the lead lobbyist for the economic justice portfolio for the Friends Committee on National Legislation. She later went to Capitol Hill to the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation and worked in Congressman Hank Johnson's office and the Senate Committee for Commerce, Science, and Transportation. At Transform, she works on getting funding for transit, advocating for transit improvements, free and reduced fare, and equitable pricing, and hopes to create a world where our transportation system can be a vehicle for political, social, and economic mobility. And the conversation today is moderated by Thea Selby, who is the co-founder and principal at MicroLBE and certified Next Step Marketing, where she combines her expertise in communications and logistics, deep relationships with people in government and transportation, and passion for infrastructure to help make things work better for people. Thea's passion for transportation and good governance are present in her ongoing advocacy as well. She is a founding member and current co-VP of the nonprofit organization San Francisco Transit Riders, who's one of the hosts of today. Thank you, SFTR, which is the voice of the riders of the largest transit agency in the Bay Area, and a co-founder of Voices for Public Transportation, a 40+ member coalition fighting for enough funding to create transformational transportation in the Bay Area. This work, in conjunction with her former elected position on the board of trustees for San Francisco City College, allows her to see issues and challenges from an agency, advocacy, and public viewpoints. Thea and her husband raised 2 kids without a car in San Francisco and continue to work for a safe, thriving, and inclusive Lower Haight from their Center City home at Haight and Fillmore. And with that, I'm going to take myself off video. And Thea, the microphone, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carter. What a great introduction. And I learned something about all three of my colleagues, and hopefully they learned something about me. As mentioned, my name is Thea, and I'm just going to say a thing or two more, which is that I have been around in advocacy and activism in this town for 20 plus years, and mostly around safety and around transportation, neighborhoods, things like that, education. My big issues are really transportation and education. And to at least my right, I'm not sure if they're all the same direction as they are for me, are three extremely amazing up and coming advocates and activists. And I'm super, super proud to be asking them a few questions today. So let's just dive right in here and talk about the first question, because for a lot of people, a lot of women actually, don't really know how to get into something that they might be interested in. And so I'd like to start with Abby, if I could, and ask you, all three of you, I'm going to ask you the same question, which is to tell us a bit about yourself and your journey to becoming an advocate or an activist. You're welcome to say if you define them differently, anything about that. And you're also welcome to bring up any activity that you're doing right now, any activism or advocacy that you'd like to make sure that we all hear about. So Abby?
Yeah, so thanks for having me on the panel. So as mentioned in my bio, I grew up in Southern California, and specifically where I grew up, we really only had Metrolinx. So I kind of had to use that to get around. And when it came to practice and things like that, I either had to walk or, maybe take the bus, which came like every hour, right? So when I was growing up, I was just like, man, back then I used to think, well, if I had a car, right? Now I think, man, if the buses came more frequently, but it was just hard to get around. And so that kind of limited the things that I could do. And I got a chance to go to Washington, D.C. after I graduated to work for a nonprofit. And there I was working on mostly economic justice issues, but I got to work on some pretty big bills like the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. And there I started to see like the connections between transportation and economic justice there. But where I really kind of became a transit advocate / activist, because I consider those to be the same thing, although some people consider them to be different, is when I got to go to Capitol Hill with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. And I was actually just placed as a transportation fellow. I didn't choose it. I was actually just placed in it. But, getting to work with Congressman Hank Johnson and then working on a Senate committee where you get to write bills and do hearings and, just like a lot of amazing things in transportation, you really see how it, affects all parts of life, right? Like I got to work on rail safety, I got to work on transportation funding, I got to work on pipelines. And so it really solidified my love for transportation and transportation policy. And so I kind of fell into transportation, but I'm happy to be here and love the work I'm doing now. And I always say that, when you step outside your door, that's essentially transportation. So transportation truly touches everything.
Thank you, Abby. And you mentioned that you're not necessarily working on a campaign that's immediate, but is there anything you would want to say about your amazing work with Voices for Public Transportation and also the organization that you work for right now?
Yeah, so I work for Transform. I mean, if you want to know what Transform's working on, we work on a bunch of different things. I'll just put Transform's link, our website, in the chat. And you can see all the different things that we're working on. One of them is the regional transportation funding measure. So if you want to get, updates on that, we also send updates to our list about that as well. So yeah, you can just sign up at the link that I put below.
Awesome. Thank you, Abby. And Haleema, if you can talk a little bit about your history and how you came to advocacy, activism, if you consider yourself one or the other.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting to see a whole series, not just one panel on Gender for Transportation Month. I came into this actually from a very gendered perspective when I was working at Alliance for Girls as the advocacy director of a nonprofit organization, where we were talking to young people about their experiences with public transportation. And unfortunately, not surprisingly, right, most of the young people had shared that they did not feel safe on public transportation. And many of them talked about the ways in which they navigated transportation from a very gendered aspect, right? Talking about sexual harassment, gender-based violence, and those types of instances that made their commute, quite frankly, dangerous. And I'm thinking, this is something that we must have addressed, right? It can't be that we haven't done anything about this, because this isn't an issue unique to the Bay Area or to BART, right? This is something that we unfortunately see across the world. It's a global issue. And yet there has not been enough to address this. And at that, things that have actually been effective. So we put together a very comprehensive policy platform and campaign in partnership with young people, with community-based organizations, to have them really drive the solutions. And ultimately, my approach to policy, my approach to advocacy is really grounded in what the community and those who are impacted need, right? That is the only way for us to actually create effective solutions that get to the root of the problem. And so with that, we launched the Not One More Girl initiative. It's a very, very impactful and powerful initiative that was driven entirely by middle school and high school youth in the Bay Area. It inspired state legislation, SB 1161, as well as other legislation in following legislative cycles. And that to me was really exciting, because you often don't get to see the change that you are fighting for happen in your lifetime. As the campaign was launching at the press conference, one of the young leaders said, I thought we'd be grandmas by the time this happened. And it's really cool that we get to be young and experience this. And to what Abby was saying about transportation, right? It's a lifeline. And when that lifeline isn't safe, that means that your access to school, housing, education, really anything that you need to live is now something that you may not be able to access, or that you can only access under certain conditions, right? Where maybe I'm not traveling at night because I don't feel safe, and I can only, stay restricted to certain days or certain routes. And so all of that to me was kind of my entry point. And since then, I have dove into all the different inequities that we see in our transportation system. And truly, it is that connector to many issues like climate, right? Like policing, and they're all very much interconnected. So I come at this issue with that intersectional lens, and understanding that we cannot look at this from a very single issue perspective, that we actually have to understand the multifaceted aspects of transportation that affect everyone's day-to-day lives.
Thank you. And Haleema, having seen the Not One More Girl, and you may be talking about that later on, I really hope you do. I think the other intersection that was really important was the art, with the amazing data that you got from surveys and things like that. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, but also, is there anything that is happening that you might want the audience to know about, that might be, any activities, any activism, any advocacy that you're doing?
Yes, I mean, on the note of art, I am hosting the Craft of Transit this coming Sunday. It's also my birthday, so consider it a big birthday party for me that you're invited to. We'll be doing arts and crafts and taking the BART from Lake Merritt all the way to the Berryessa station. I'll be bringing free craft giveaways, so it'll be really fun. And it is going to be an experience that hopefully allows us to envision what the future of transportation could look like, right? Where you can get on a transportation system and feel safe and feel connected and have a sense of community and belonging, which is what the Not One More Girl initiative strives to do, right? Through culture change, because we can't just change policy. We also have to change the narrative. We have to address cultural norms that have allowed and normalized for so many forms of harm and violence to occur in our transit systems. And so that's really where the role of art has come in. And, really appreciate Carter for dropping the link in the chat for the event that's coming up where you can sign up. And then I'll also drop the link to the BART Not One More Girl page that has a lot more data, but I'll get into that later.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Haleema. And Lian, you're probably going to want to start with the campaign you're working on, which is going gangbusters, in my opinion, and everybody should vote for it if you're in San Francisco. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting, and to some extent unusual about you talking about different intersections, is that you're both a bike, a transit, and a pedestrian. And I would call you activist, in the sense that there's some actions, I don't know if we talked about this in the last time, but you were at least an important part of a funeral, for example, which literally, I think, turned around the way some political people were thinking about transit. And maybe can you talk a little bit, starting with how you got into this in the first place? Very interested in that. Maybe, you know, activism and advocacy. And is there anything that you'd want to plug?
Thank you so much. Yeah, so really happy to be here. I'm Lian Chang. I am still working on getting my driver's license. I swear I will do it eventually. But that has really naturally made me a lifelong user and supporter of transit, as well as safe streets for biking and walking. But it was really only a few years ago that I got involved as an advocate or activist. We'll settle that question in a moment, maybe, or at least touch on it. So you know, I'm still pretty new to all of this work in a sense. It was during the pandemic when, you know, recreation opportunities were not available. I had a small 3-year-old son. There was no school. And we suddenly had slow streets in San Francisco. JFK got closed to cars, and some folks started working on organizing to keep JFK Promenade, you know, it wasn't JFK Promenade at that point. It was to keep JFK car free at that point. And I, you know, started you know, hearing about their efforts and seeing events that they were putting on. And one day I just thought, yeah, I'll go out and see what they're doing. And I know how to make balloon animals. I'm going to bring my pump and some balloons, and I'll make some balloons on Car Free JFK. And I didn't even like tell the organizers that I was going to come and make balloon animals. I was like, it's public space. I'm just going to come and make balloon animals, right? And it, you know, and it was super fun to meet people and to be part of the community in that way, and to start to get involved. And so that was kind of how I got hooked. And I've tried a wide variety of things in a short period of time since then. Whether, you know, on the nonprofit side, I've been a volunteer member, board member, and staff at Walk San Francisco doing pedestrian safety stuff. As an independent advocate, I worked, as Thea kindly mentioned, on a campaign called Faster Safer Geary, where we were really just supporting, me and a few other advocates. We were just supporting the agency's plan that had been in the works in various forms for like 20 years to just put a bus lane on Geary and just extend a project that had already been completed, you know, up until Stanyan, and they just want to complete that, you know, for several more blocks, finish what they started. So real simple, but it had run into some serious opposition. So so it was clear that, you know, a little bit of support was needed in the community to kind of show that people wanted this. And so that was a campaign that I worked on as an independent advocate. And I've also started getting involved in transit funding work. So yes, this transit funeral, which luckily nobody died for the sake of that funeral, but it was an idea to show to show how serious the funding crisis was, and that if, you know, there wasn't, if new state funding for transit, that there would be, you know, the death of public transit throughout the Bay Area. And it was funny, Thea, that you mentioned activism versus advocacy for that. And I tend to think of myself as an advocate, but I know that a lot of these activities, if you're thinking about like doing a vigil and holding up cardboard signs, you know, after someone has died on the street, like that is more activism in a certain way, right? And a lot of these things may be. And I think the funeral was kind of an example of like, I find some of the spaces that are really most interesting for me to operate in, and that I've like had the most fun in some ways, is between advocacy and activism. And at that event, you know, it definitely had an activist feeling for it, right? We made art for it. We made like, you know, I made all these like trains and buses like out of big cardboard, and then we put them in caskets and carried them to show that, you know, to make it a funeral. You know, and there was street performances and street theater and so on that folks were doing. So it had a very activist grassroots kind of feel to it. The activists from the East Bay like came over on BART carrying the model of the BART and in the casket. And so it had that feeling to it. At the same time, like, you know, the mayor spoke at it, Senator Weiner spoke at it. You know, it wasn't like a complete outside game when we had like a whole range of like San Francisco and Bay Area elected officials speaking at this event. So yeah, so I don't know, was that activism or advocacy?
And maybe they blend, maybe they just blend together. I think of advocacy as being more policy oriented, and activism is action. And
Yeah.
maybe they often blend together.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's how I think of it too. And I think it's like it's a gradient, right? So yeah, transit funding, and then I will say, and then now I am working on Yes on L, which is a San Francisco ballot measure to bring new funding to Muni.
Thank you. And I will add about L is that funding would be going to something, a nexus that is near and dear to somebody who cares about education and transportation. One of the uses could be continuing to give free Muni passes to the K through 12 and hopefully extending it to City College, which I think would be magnificent, and maybe other colleges as well. So thank you for that. I will just briefly say I have my own event that I'm working on that I'd love for you to consider. It's not until the 30th of October. It is called Thrive with Bay Area Transportation. And the idea behind it is that I believe that this region needs to hold hands and jump into the transportation pool together. And so we're going to pull people together from all over the region to talk about that, and hopefully get an audience full of people like you who can make a difference and who can actually get the word out that we agree on the inspirational thing of what transformational transportation means to us and to the people we serve. So I've asked Carter to send some information out the day after tomorrow, because I'm not as organized as you guys, so I will have that ready for you tomorrow. So the next question is a little bit about the gender, which really, Haleema, you're the only one who mentioned really at this point being a woman. And we do want to talk a little bit about that, and wondering what things you're proud of and what barriers you may have seen for women, or may see currently for women in advocacy and activism. I'm going to start with you, Abby.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned earlier when I worked in Washington, D.C., I got to work to pass some pretty amazing bills like the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, with both did huge things for transportation and our climate. I also got to write a bill that would help give transportation funding for like major sports events or the Olympics. So, writing policy that could actually change our entire nation. Those are some really cool things that I got to do. I think also to transform works really heavy in the community, and we have a heavy program staff. And so, making sure that there's like connection between policy and programs, and going to community events and making sure that our policy reflects what the community wants is something that I really like. And I sometimes felt was missing when you do national work. It's like very much interfacing with members of Congress and lobbying, and less with the community. I think some of the barriers I would see is really, quite frankly, is gender. I mean, when I first got into transportation, I was like, wow, I just didn't see any women. And, or I won't say any, I didn't see a lot of women in transportation. I think the Bay Area has kind of, led the way, as a lot of people who lead, the agencies here are women, and there's a lot of women in transportation. But, where I started off in transportation in DC, there was barely any women working on transportation issues. And, I was even had my own reservations about even staying in the transportation field, because I was like, I don't know if there's really a place for me here. But, I met some great women who encouraged me to go after transportation opportunities. And, I ended up at Transform, which ended up being great. But I think, just having role models and leaders, that can be a big barrier.
Yeah, thank you, Abby. And I know in California, I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but high-speed rail, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it was largely started by women, believe it or not. Like that Prop 1A was because of people like Fiona Ma and a whole crew of women in the legislature. And there weren't as many in the legislature back then as there are now, who got together and said, we're gonna make this happen, and they did. So I do think it's great to have, all sorts of diversity that in the legislature and at the Congress level to make sure that we get everybody's perspectives. Haleema, can you talk a little bit about your work? And you had mentioned last time we talked that the barriers for women might also be sort of in the job sphere. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, having gone through the job search just recently after completing my public policy master's from UC Berkeley, I can definitely attest to the challenges of finding positions in the transportation field that are centered around equity, that value equity, right? And I think a lot of roles really lean towards planners or engineers, very technical roles. And that sometimes overlooks the fact that transportation isn't just about technical planning, it's also about the relationships and the experiences that people have. The relationships that people have to places, to land, right? When we think about the experiences and how people navigate transportation based on their identity, right? If you're a parent and you have a stroller, or if you have a disability, right? There's all those factors that don't always get taken into account when we focus too much on the technical side. And so that was definitely a challenge at many moments where I felt very much like, oh my God, am I even going to find a place for myself in the industry? Because my work has really focused on pushing the sector largely centered around reimagining safety. My work that I had done with Transform around reimagining safety and creating like a framework with case studies for how do we actually address our public safety crisis on transportation without increasing policing. My most recent report, which just came out today, on decriminalizing transportation and the intersection between the criminal legal system and transportation, right? Whether it's walking or biking, people have to deal with so much when they go outside. And then the Not One More Girl initiative, right, which is very much focused on sexual harassment, gender-based violence, also from a non-police approach. And all of these perspectives and lenses are not necessarily taken into account when we have a very technical element, right? I'll give you an example. There's a bus line right in front of my house. It's the Dream. It runs pretty frequently, I would say every 15 minutes. And there are certain times of the day where even though it's the convenient option, it's the affordable option, and I can use it, I don't use it because I don't feel safe on it. And so when we think about transportation planning and we were talking about saving transit, we're talking about expanding transit, we can do all that. But if we're not thinking about the user experience, in particular of those who are not cis white men, we are missing the mark. So that is really what I've been pushing. And I think, in some ways the industry is not fully ready for that level of shift, but it's getting there. And I think conversations like these are how we start to raise awareness amongst the sector, amongst our colleagues, and also really thankful for all the advocates. I know we have folks from Voices from Public Transportation here. They've really been pushing the needle on this, and folks like Laurel at Public Advocates. So I just want to give a shout out to all those folks who are kind of pushing it, even if it's not always well received, because that is how we make change happen, right? And we think about advocates, sometimes we are those troublemakers and noisemakers that not everyone is happy to see. But I think down the road, right, this is going to have really positive benefits and outcomes for creating transportation systems that actually serve the people that we are trying to support.
Yeah, I think that's really well put, Haleema. And I will say that there was a legislator, her name was Elaine Easton, and she said that budgets are a reflection of your values. And I think that often when you look at what jobs are available, and you see, what people value. And I think it's something I certainly am 100% in your corner on that valuing in jobs the work of people who really work with community and who are doing the work to get that feedback. It makes for a better project. We all know that. It makes for a better project. And at the same time, it's really what we're supposed to be doing, because we're supposed to be serving the community in whatever it is we're doing. So I appreciated you bringing that particular aspect up.
And just to add to that, I think a lot of that centers on, oh, I think you froze. I just wanted to add to that and just name that, a lot of that centers on lived experience, right? Not all of us are coming to transportation from a technical lens. I think going back to what Abby shared about, we all experience transportation the moment we step out of the house. And some of us are coming into this space with that lens. And that is also just as valuable as someone who has gone in and done a whole training on GIS and planning. And so I just want to name that as well in the space as we think about what does planning mean and what can we actually expand to include in this sector.
Awesome. I'm actually going to go off camera because I think you're right, Haleema. Can you guys hear me now? Okay, let's keep going then. Lian, I was just going to say that you brought in public comment as something that could be a barrier in some ways. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about that, because I think a lot of people don't think about that. What is it? What does it mean? How do you learn about it? Although, if you wouldn't mind sort of expanding upon what you talked about when we were together. And also you mentioned diversity in all of its, beautiful range.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I totally agree, Abby and Haleema, about, representation, and also just this question of like, what does it mean to do advocacy? And so, while there are all kinds of different people doing advocacy for transit, what I've noticed, at least in San Francisco, is that it certainly does skew white, well-off, cisgender male. And in San Francisco specifically, it also skews towards tech industry folks. And it's not a bad thing to have so much energy from San Francisco's tech community, advocating for better things, but it can give the sense that there is one kind of advocate or there is one way to do advocacy. And so like one place where I sort of noticed this when, I was starting to get involved and just starting to show up for like public meetings for my first few times to give public comment, is that there would be like a certain way that people would do it, right?
Lian, can you explain what public comment is for people
Oh,
who
yeah.
have never done it?
Yeah, absolutely. So at like public meetings, whether it's like elected officials or a commission or a board of some kind, like often in San Francisco, it'll be like at the SFMTA, like the board that oversees the transit and transportation agency. They'll have their meeting in public at City Hall, in this like fancy word paneled room. And if you want to, as a member of the public, like give your opinion, you can write an email in advance. Or you can show up at the meeting and then there'll be a certain time in the meeting where they'll give, anyone in the public can stand up and speak for a minute or two about the issue. And just like the whole thing about it is it can be intimidating and is not equally available to everyone, right? So whether it's just like the time of day, like who has the flexibility of time to show up often for like hours for a meeting because you're waiting for like a specific time when you can speak for 60 seconds. And that only takes 60 seconds, but you're there for 3 hours. But also just like knowing to show up there, feeling comfortable coming into City Hall, feeling comfortable speaking in front of a board or elected officials, right? So just like all of those things, I think can be a barrier, and especially if, you're not a white, well-off, cisgender male, and you're seeing most of the people who are giving comment look very different, then I think it can be all the more, a barrier, right? And I think
what if you're a mom, Lian?
And what if you're a mom,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. And like, what if you're mom and you're like wondering like, oh, I gotta go home and pick up my kid. And I don't know if it's gonna, how long this is gonna last and all that. So I think the interesting thing that I found with being a mom is that, like I have been able to like as my son has gotten like, older and he's sort of like grown up around this advocacy work, he's been interested in it, like what is mom doing, and he loves to ride his bike, he loves JFK, so he's interested in this stuff too, and it's been really great to be able to get him involved in it. And so while there can be barriers, I think all of these things can be opportunities too. So one little hack that I found, it's a little bit different now because not all public comment can be done by phone anymore, but this worked great. And in some meetings it still can be done by phone, is that I would get my son to give public comment, you know, in support of a slow street or whatever. And the part of it that was a hack was that, like, okay, a 3-year-old is not going to wait for hours on end for his moment to speak and then be like ready to deliver his 30 seconds at that moment. So I would just like get him to record it on my phone. And you know, and we can record it like as many times as we want. I can crop it, I can do whatever we need to get that little sound bite that he's able to do in his cute little child voice. And then I can wait on public comment. And when they say it's Jay Harry's turn, or it's, you know, speaker number 43 or whatever it is, then I just hold my phone up against you know, against the other phone, you know, and then like and then play
That's
the
bloody
recording.
brilliant, may I say. I have never thought of that, but I think we should all steal that whenever possible.
So that was my mom hack to figure out like how can I get like my like a slightly shy child to like actually to do it. It was like he felt comfortable making a recording, but it would have been too arduous for him to like wait for hours on end for public comment.
That's interesting, because one of my favorite public comments that I did was actually in Viz Valley in San Francisco. And there we were around seniors, African-American seniors, who are not going to go to City Hall. They just, it's a long way away. And I pulled out, you know, the iPhone, and I started videotaping them, and I sent it to the supervisors. I couldn't do the public comment per se, but I sent it to the supervisors because these are the people that really, it is the people that care. So that's kind of a great hack. We should all remember that.
Yeah, that really is. I think I will have to borrow that as well. Public comment is also how Not One More Girl campaign and the initiative was moved forward, right? We brought a resolution to the BART board, and we mobilized young people who had never given public comment before, middle school, high school youth. They got their permission slips to go on like a field trip, and they came, and we had an hour public comment and testimony from young people about their experiences, and it was incredibly powerful, I think, for them to have that experience, but not only to give that comment, but then see what they said actualized, taken seriously, and implemented. So I just wanted to shout out that. And also to your point, Lian, about the different roles, I just wanted to plug Deepa Iyer's social change ecosystem map. For those who haven't seen it, outlines a lot of the different roles that we need in our movement, right? And whether it's caregiving, whether it's cooking food for people, whether it's giving public comment, right? Not all of us are going to be in the front lines, and that is completely okay, right? We each have our role. Some of us are going to make art, right? Some of us are going to create spaces for joy. Some of us are going to do the healing work. So I just wanted to name that every single person has space, and we have room, and we need you in this movement. So as we think about all the upcoming activations coming up around the regional measure, right? And just all the work that we have cut out for us, quite frankly, in terms of the work that we need to do to save our public transportation system. You know, we need all of you there, and there is a role for you.
Thank you. Thank you for that call to action, Haleema. I'm gonna send us the last question that we have for you, and then hopefully there'll be time for questions from the audience. And that is, what do you wish you knew when you started working with advocacy or activism that you know now? So basically, what advice, Abby, let's start with you, that you would want to give young people who are just starting out, even though you are a young person, but there are even younger people.
Yeah, and I actually really love this question. I would just say, you know, stay true to yourself and your values. You know, never lose the North Star of who you're trying to help. I think the longer you get into this work or you stay in this work, you might want to, you know, cut deals or do things that are not best or what you're trying to go for just to get a result. But I would just say, you know, stay true to who you're actually trying to help and never forget them when you're promoting whatever policy, you're doing whatever method to try and get to where you want to go. I'd also say, you know, change takes time, especially, you know, I worked on federal policy, which takes forever. If you think the state takes a long time, the federal government is something else. So, you know, I would just say, you know, don't be disappointed if things don't happen right away, but, you know, also don't get complacent, you know, seize opportunities whenever you have the chance, even if it's not the vehicle or the method that you didn't originally think that, you know, your policy issue might move on. Yeah, definitely go after it. I would also say that, you don't have to specialize. I know this is a transportation call, but, you don't have to specialize. I think it's okay to be interested in many different political issues. I mentioned I started off in economic justice. And, I think that many of the issues are interconnected and that the best advocate or activist looks at everything intersectionally anyway. So if you can do that, that'll definitely help you. And then I would just say, just because you're the lone voice on something, it doesn't mean that you're wrong. I'm not saying don't work in coalition or don't take advice. Those things are great. But, sometimes you have to be the trailblazer. You were called to lead. So don't be afraid if you're the only person in the room advocating for something. And then lastly, and I'm still learning this one, but I would say don't be afraid to ask for help, to reach out to people, for opportunities, to ask them about their experience. Those things can really help show you a path that you didn't know was possible to take. I kind of mentioned how I had some women leaders who kind of convinced me to continue on the transportation path. And so you never know, like, what a conversation with someone, what it can do for your life. So never be afraid to just reach out to people, ask for help, and to speak up. So yeah, those are a few life things that I think would help a young person getting into this field in any field.
And can I ask you if you can to give us the names? Who are these women? Who, because I think they deserve that shout out as well. Do you?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's kind of a lot of them.
A lot of them. Okay, well, just a few, just to
I
give
don't.
them that.
I like. I feel like I'll say
thank
some
you.
names and then I'll forget some, and then it's
Yeah.
like they're not any less important. But yeah, I had conversations with a lot of people. I mean, there's Renee from Tri-State Campaign. This is based in New York. Also Midori, who's on the MTA board in New York City. Those are some two people. There's women on the committee that I was on, the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, senior staffers who I talked with. I mean, just so many people from different.
It sounds like you reached out too, Abby. You
yeah,
weren't just
yeah.
sitting back here, but you were actually actively reaching out. Is that
Yeah,
right?
would
you advise that
yeah,
people...
yeah, but I'll say that it was hard for me at first because I'm a very like independent, like you can do it on your own kind of person. So it was hard for me at first, but I definitely started to reach out, and once you do those a few initial ones, it gets easier and easier, and then you just see the benefit. It doesn't mean there's always going to be something to come out of it. It could just be you just get to hear a person's story, and I find that super impactful. So yeah, just go for it.
Awesome. Wonderful advice. Haleema, do you have some thoughts of something you found out the hard way that you might be able to get people to find a little easier?
Yeah, I mean, Abby just gave a very wonderful list, and I want to plus one all of those things, right? I think having those mentors in your life really changes everything for you. Having people who've done all the struggles and they can tell you this is what not to do. And so I think that's been, for me, a huge, huge help, especially early in my career, to be like, oh, okay, I don't have to go do the whole thing myself. This person has done it and they know how to do it, and I can just learn from them. So I think have those mentors, have those relationships, and maintain those, right? You want to make sure you're checking in with folks over time. I think, I was just at the National Organization for Youth Safety's youth convening on transportation equity this weekend. And one of the things that we talked about was non-reformist reforms. And I wanted to uplift that in this space because I think it's very easy to look at policy change that's proposed and think like, oh, this is a great idea. And sometimes we don't think through everything in detail to really be critical of it and say, is this addressing the root cause, right? Is this going to help us create a fundamental shift in the system that we're advocating for, right? We can look at self-driving cars, for example, right? There are ways in which, yes, self-driving cars could reduce drunk driving, but they are still rooted in a system that is centered around cars. So is that really a useful reform, or is it upholding a system that is centered around cars, right? So just asking those questions and being critical, right? Always ask who's missing, who's not at the table. No matter how inclusive, I think I am, I always have to ask that question because I'm always going to have those oversights, right? And that's always going to happen. And also when other people hold you accountable, right? When you're in a leadership position, people will and should hold you accountable, right? And so when you're getting that feedback, when you're getting that critique, when you're being called out, that is a gift. Someone had the courage, they took the time to tell you that you were wrong, or that this did not land well, or that you created harm. And all of that is very much possible, right? We all do it. But it is how we respond to that and how we go forward from there that really is what matters. So for me, it's always been, you know, even if I feel defensive about it, having that mindset shift of let me take this in and think about it, because this is useful information and feedback that's going to make me a better advocate, that's going to make me better at what I do. And then I would say the last thing is just imagination and rest. I think they go hand in hand. You cannot imagine and dream of a better world that is not yet possible, that does not yet exist if you are not rested. I have learned this the very, very hard way. I used to burn out like every month, because I was working so hard, I was doing so much, and I was trying to just stuff it all in. And, you know, I realized I'm going to be working for the rest of my life. I don't have to do it all this year or this month. I have the rest of my life to figure this out. And I need to be able to do this in a way that is sustainable. And that means taking breaks, right? I'm still working on it. I'm not saying I have it down and I have not figured it out yet, but I am making those behavioral and mental changes so that I can be more sustainable in what I'm doing. And what that has allowed me to do is be more creative, and to imagine and to think beyond this very limited paradigm that we often operate in, where we think everything that we want to see and happen will never happen and it's not possible, right? And we can't think like that, right? We have to be able to say and speak into reality our biggest, most irresistible transportation dreams, right? And for that, I need to be rested. So those are the big things. And I also just want to give a shout out to Tamika Butler, who has just done amazing work for our field, and also to Adonia Lugo, who sits on the California Transportation Commission. They have both been incredibly supportive and helpful to me in this journey of kind of figuring out this transportation sector and identifying, you know, what is the strategy and what is the approach to create a sector-wide change. So those are my things.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Lian, same question. What advice do you have to try and, not that we can really skip them, to be perfectly honest, sometimes we just have to make the mistakes to really learn it ourselves, but just to at least give people an idea of, you know.
Yeah, so I think, you know, when we were talking about public comment before, I think that was an example where when I was first getting started and I saw how other advocates, like independent advocates, would run a campaign. For example, in Safe Streets Advocacy, it would often be like, you know, they would look at a proposal that the agency is coming up with, or a street that maybe is dangerous and that there isn't even a proposal yet, and they would develop their own proposal using some street design software. They would, you know, make renderings of it. They would set up an online petition. They would socialize it in certain online spaces and get people to sign it. And they would show up at public comment, like with their petition, talking about how many people support this, and here's my proposal, and this is why it's better. And like, I saw that pattern, like as just one example, a few different times. And I thought, okay, is that what I have to do? I'm not sure, like, do I really have the skills to do all of those parts? Is that how I really want to, you know, and so on. And I think one thing that I have learned that's really helped me is that there's just so many different ways of being an advocate or activist, right? And so I've really enjoyed like experimenting and trying out different things, and figuring out like what do, like, can I uniquely do? Like, what am I good at? Like, what insight do I have that maybe I can see something that might be missing, or an opportunity? So the transit funeral was kind of like that. It was an opportunity to like use art in a way to like really raise the, you know, attention around this issue. The idea for a funeral was not mine, but, you know, but when it was brought to me, like, Lian, we need you to make a casket and a vehicle to put in the casket, you know, then, you know, it was an opportunity to like think about what that should look like and kind of make it happen.
So what I'm hearing a little bit, Lian, is that you take your piece, that you don't have to, you know, you may see all of it, but just doing your piece is really kind of
doing your piece and finding out like what is like, I don't like that, like realizing that, okay, I don't have to do like advocacy the way I see other people doing it, right? That it's like, it's a whole ecosystem, and we all can like play different roles, right? So another thing that I found is, and again, it has to do with the advocate versus activist thing, is, or, you know, inside outside game is like, I don't always feel like I fit in perfectly in, you know, the institutional space or in the really activist space. And something that I've been able to do, in a few moments is like be a really good connector between those groups, right? And sometimes not fitting in great in either one of those means that you can actually kind of move in between.
Well, that's a really interesting point. Yeah, I think that's a really good point and
Yeah.
helpful, especially for those of us who don't feel like we fit in exactly everywhere.
For sure.
You're a
Yeah. And
connector. Yeah.
yeah, and sometimes it's just like even really simple things that can actually be really powerful. Like one thing that I found that I kind of love is making signs for rallies or press conference or events. Like literally just like I have cardboard in my house that I cut out into big sheets, so I'm ready to make signs at any moment because I have all the cardboard ready, and I have like the paint pens. Which I've discovered are much better to use than Sharpies because they're opaque. But but I've discovered that like if you offer to make signs for an event and you make signs that like it's like a physical task that you're doing to help out the group, but also like it's a very powerful position to be in, to like be actually like figuring out the messaging and writing down the messages and then bringing that. And even if you bring cardboard blanks or whatever, and other people can make new signs at the rally, like oftentimes people are just going to grab what's available and use that. So if you're making signs and you're making like you bring 20, 30 signs or even 2 signs to a thing, and like that is your message that's getting photographed by the media and that people are seeing, that can be a really powerful way to speak without even opening your voice in a way. So yeah, I don't know. It's like funny that like how powerful you can be just with like markers and cardboard.
Cardboard. Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. And I love the low tech nature of it. We do have a question, Abby. I don't know if you're able to stay, but if you are, I'll go ahead and give you this question first. This is a question from the audience. And since we have a few minutes, I'll go ahead and ask it. As women, do you feel that elected officials listen to you less? I'm going to add in there or more than they listen to advocates who are men. Abby.
Well, I mean, we had an interesting experience at an MTC meeting recently. So, I'm gonna say it depends on who you're talking to. But I do think that definitely that women in general, when we speak up, right, it's like, oh, you're whining, or it's like you're complaining, that kind of attitude is behind there. So, I kind of just, my method is to just roll with it. They're gonna say that anyway. I think especially being a woman of color, there's another dimension that goes on there as well, right? Like you're angry or whatever. But I definitely think there's a difference on how we're viewed when we speak to legislators, whether you're a man or a woman. And then when you add race to it, it's like a whole nother complication.
Thank you, Haleema.
I used to think about that a lot, and now I don't really think about it. If people don't want to listen to me because of what I look like or who I am, that's their problem. They're missing out on good stuff. Um, I realized that it just kind of became a burden that I was carrying that wasn't mine to hold. It's really on them. So I'm going to say what I have to say. I'm going to square up if I need to, take it or leave it. And that's helped me a lot in just freeing up my capacity and energy to focus on what I want to build and who I want to build with.
Awesome. Lian.
Yeah, so I think that like I think I have found sometimes I feel like I could get listened to less or more, and I feel like I have had better success over time when I have been able to figure out how I can speak in a voice that feels authentic to me and using points that I feel confident delivering. So, I know other people who, yeah, who feel very confident proposing an alternate street design and saying, I personally don't feel like I would have that confidence to say, I think this is a better, like, it's just not how I personally would want to operate. Or, nor would I have the confidence, for example, to speak about like whatever it is, right? Like if we're talking about transit funding, like, no, I don't know all the intricacies and ins and outs of the SFMTA budget or, whatever. And so if I tried to speak to that, I think, I would not have the, the confidence or authority or like all the facts in my hand to get heard equally as someone else who may have more facts or may be seen and believed to have more facts because of the way they look, right? So like when I've been able to speak to things that like are that I do have, you know, the confidence, the experience to speak to, that has really helped me because I'm delivering the message better also. So
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think, and Haleema, I think you do this naturally, as do you, Abby, is that when you have a story to tell, whatever it is, whether it's facts or whether it's, you know, your own personal story, and you're able to deliver that authentically and with confidence, I thought the question was interesting, and that's why I added the or more. I'm not sure if I have seen it in my 20 plus years of advocacy, a male female thing. I have seen, I will say that sometimes in a one-on-one, there are some benefits to the person being the same gender. That's been my experience. And sometimes that can be, you know, I try to glom on to anything. So if somebody has a child, I might talk about my children. If somebody is a meditator, I just talk to somebody who meditated. I might talk about meditation. Whatever it might be, is to try and find some sort of, you know, point of connection as well. I think that's super. I think you said that too, Abby, the points of connection. I am going to have the last question be, and this was one suggested by Carter. Do any of you three have a question that you'd like to ask the other one of you? And let's give you just 2 minutes for this, because I want to make sure that, you know, everybody has time to think. Anybody?
yeah, I guess I have a question, could be either for Haleema or Abby, but is there a time when like you have learned from someone that you were not expecting to learn something from them, or you were not expecting to learn that thing from that person, you know, about advocacy from someone who you met?
That's a good question. I think for me, it's always been, you know, again, going back to lived experience, right? Talking to someone, even just the other day, as I was heading back from the National Organization for Youth Safety convening, I had a conversation with someone on the plane and learned from them about how they were viewing transportation and how they were viewing transportation routes and how it was affecting them. So I think there's always something that you can learn from people. Even at the conference itself, there were some young people who were talking about their entryway into transportation from the perspective of climate, and I learned a lot from them as well. So I think, you know, there's a lot to learn everywhere, and it's just a matter of like, do we want to receive that information, and how are we paying attention to that as it comes up?
So, Abby, anything? Any strange place that you've gotten?
Well, you know, when I was in DC, I was a registered lobbyist, and you know, I lobbied a lot of interesting legislators, legislators. I'll just say it like that. But what I kind of learned from like different people I was in coalition with, because I was also in coalition with some interesting groups, is like how, you know, what can be an effective argument. And so, you know, learning from the people around me, even if, you know, we didn't agree necessarily on a lot of policy issues, we had maybe one issue that we agreed with and we were working together to get it passed. You kind of learn, you know, how do you get like a certain legislator to take a meeting with you? How do you get them to you know, respond positively in the lobby visit, even if you might say something that you know that their office doesn't agree with? And so I learned a lot of that when I was in DC, and just from yeah, like I said, a lot of interesting people that I never would have expected that I would learn anything from. So yeah.
It's good sense. Well, I think we'll end on that note and just say thank you so much to Abby, Haleema, and Lian for this amazing conversation. And I will hand it back over to Carter.
Thank you all so much. That was so wonderful. And thank you, Thea, for moderating such a great and fascinating discussion. And thank you all for tuning in for the third part of the Gendered Perspectives on Bay Area Transit series. Coming up Saturday is the big old celebration. So we'd love to have you join us. It's a ferry ride from San Francisco to Richmond. We'll be joined by volunteers from the National Park Service, who are going to do a little bit of a tour from the ferry itself, talking about historic locations we can see. And then once we get there, we're going to go to the Rosie the Riveter World War II Homefront Visitor Center and learn about the people of the East Bay who you know, won World War II, the people doing the hard work, often behind the scenes, generally for low pay and not very well thanked. I felt like there might be some similarities with that. And also as part of that, there's going to be a little bit of a reception, so it'd be great to have you all come on out. And with that, thank you all so much for what a lovely evening. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your great work. And I will see you all on another Zoom, I'm sure. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank
Thank you.